Hello everyone, Gabe from The Wire, back in Northern California. And today is October 21st, Saturday, October 21st, exactly 2 weeks after the beginning of the attempted genocide against Israelis by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in southern Israel, and the beginning of the Israeli-Gaza war that is still ongoing. I thought I would take this evening to kind of give a roundup of the events of the last 2 weeks, the current state of things, and talk about some of the implications of this conflict as we begin to see it escalate into a regional affair. I don't want to say a war yet, but it is definitely a regional affair, we can call it. So first of all, as unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past 2 weeks, you've known that Hamas and Islamic Jihad conducted an unprovoked slaughter of Israeli Jews in what's called the Gaza envelope, the Israeli communities around the Gaza Strip, on October 7th, during Shabbat, during the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah. At least 2,500 Palestinian men and boys crossed the security barrier, either by blowing up portions of the barrier with explosives or using bulldozers or other means of destruction to create 19 openings in the border fence, including the major Erez crossing. They overwhelmed Israeli security forces stationed along the border at the Erez crossing and in other places, murdering them, taking their vehicles, and began what we can call a modern-day pogrom across the Gaza envelope, murdering at least 1,400 Israelis, we know now. More and more we're getting details about that slaughter from eyewitnesses, from first responders who find the aftermath, and also the forensic analysis and the coroners and others who are examining the bodies and the crime scenes. And by the day, we're learning that this attack, this 24-hour free-for-all jihad, was more brutal and more demonically violent and vile than you could almost possibly imagine. Some of the details of which are just unthinkable is, I think, the right word. So I won't get into that, but if you follow The Wire on Twitter/X, you have a lot of those details. So after that, within half a day or so, the IDF and law enforcement had mobilized to the point where they were able to repel the invaders. They killed at least about 1,000 of them. They're still finding some of them. I just saw today in Beersheba and Lod, which is near Tel Aviv, they're still finding dozens of these infiltrators from Gaza and arresting them. So over 1,000 were killed, hundreds have been arrested. So the investigation obviously is ongoing, interrogations, and we're learning more and more about what happened that day. At this point, close to 400,000 Israeli reservists have been mobilized. A good portion of them have massed around the Gaza Strip. Another good portion of them are currently deployed around the Lebanese and Syrian borders in the Golan Heights. Hamas, beginning that day and continuing every day since, has launched hundreds of rockets per day into southern and central Israel. It's almost a nightly thing that you can set your watch by now. In communities like Ashkelon and Tel Aviv, get nightly rocket barrages. At this point, close to 7,000 rockets have been fired into Israel, many of them causing billions of US dollars in damage and causing casualties, killing people and maiming people. And so this has been a difficult season, not just for the people of the Gaza envelope, but for all Israelis in every part of the country. Have felt this tension, have felt the effects of this war. It's not localized. It's had a national impact for the state of Israel. Israel has so far not led a ground offensive into Gaza. The most popular and widely accepted explanation for that is because the United States and European nations are kind of back channel negotiating with Hamas through Qatar for the release of hostages. As many of you know, two of the 210 hostages that Hamas and Islamic Jihad took into Gaza on the 7th, two of them were released yesterday. Hamas framed this as a humanitarian gesture. Really, what it is more of a way of buying time. The longer they can prolong an Israeli ground offensive from happening, the better for them. So by releasing hostages, onesies, twosies, they can give the sense that they are willing to negotiate, or that they're willing to listen to reason and forestall what would ultimately be their destruction when the Israeli military goes in and occupies Gaza. So that has been the dynamic in the south. In the north, it's been a little bit different. As all of you know, Lebanese Hezbollah, which is another proxy of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, much bigger and potent and more dangerous than Hamas, has a much larger and much more advanced missile arsenal compared to Hamas. They have not, for whatever reason, fully entered this conflict yet. Again, there is a lot of speculation as to why that is. I've heard anything from Hamas was originally going to conduct a coordinated strike with Hezbollah against Israel. Hamas jumped the gun. Iran has held back Hezbollah, or that Hezbollah has been hesitant in their own right. We don't really know the reason why. Their stated reason for not entering the conflict is that they are holding out until the IDF, or the Israeli Defense Forces, enter Gaza in a ground incursion, and then they will fully enter the conflict. However, at this point, the northern border with Lebanon has essentially become a front of this war. There are daily attacks from Hezbollah against IDF military installations, with guided anti-tank missiles, with rockets. Over 30 rockets fired across the border yesterday. Today, another round of rocket fire and an attempted infiltration from Lebanon into Israel by Hamas. that was thwarted by the Israeli military responding with artillery and airstrikes. 16 members of Hezbollah killed so far, at least one IDF officer killed so far, and one civilian, Israeli civilian. 6 Hezbollah fighters killed today. So today has been the deadliest day for Hezbollah. And so the Northern Front was not an immediate firestorm, but has been slowly, it's been a slow burn. It's been slowly ratcheting it up day by day by day. Hezbollah, for whatever reason, has not chosen to push all their chips in and go all in against Israel. They have chosen to at first nibble around the edges, and now deliberately and intentionally and gradually escalate day by day. So we will see if and when the Israeli military actually goes into Gaza, whether or not that provokes a full Hezbollah response or not. We know that Iran is staging its allied proxies in the Syrian Golan Heights, across from the Israeli Golan Heights. So Iran is definitely doing its part. In fact, the head of the IRGC is in Syria today to assist with mobilizing Iranian-aligned militias along the border with Israel. So there's definitely a war footing in the north. There's definitely escalation there, and very, very, very high tension, and some cross-border conflict. So far, not at the scale that we would have expected to see, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So that is essentially the state of things. The international picture is the other piece of the conflict, and I think the dynamic that has larger implications. Just today, I saw video of tens of thousands of people marching in Washington, D.C., over 100,000 people marching in London, thousands of people marching in Sydney, Australia, hundreds, probably thousands of people marching in Warsaw, Poland, all protesting the Israeli government and chanting "Free Palestine, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." So this anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, and in many cases anti-Semitic protest movement is literally worldwide. We're seeing it across the Western Hemisphere. We're seeing it in Europe. We're seeing it in Australia. We're obviously seeing it all over the Muslim world. A synagogue president in the city of Detroit, in Rashida Tlaib's district, was stabbed to death today. There have been other incidents of violence against Jews and Jewish property over the past 2 weeks. So these aren't just words. These are the type of hateful and genocidal chants and rallies that lead to actual violence, that lead to actual persecution against the Jewish people. So we're definitely beginning to see that kind of, I guess you could call it 1930s Germany vibe, where there are mass rallies and intentional targeting of Jewish people and Jewish property, almost from a grassroots populist level that has been either tolerated by or encouraged by the authorities, depending on the national context. So the Israeli government has been evacuating its embassies all over the Middle East, even in friendly Arab countries. And there's a palpable fear among Jews in Britain and Jews in France that are seeing what's happening on the streets of Paris, and Jews in the United States. They're seeing what's happening on the streets of New York and DC and Chicago and Los Angeles and in university campuses across the country. And now with the murder of a not an overtly religious or Zionist Jew in Detroit, there's a real sense of that nobody's safe from this. It doesn't matter what your political leaning is. It doesn't matter what your religious affiliation is as a Jew. If you're a Jewish person, you can become a target. So this is, I think, the wider implication of the conflict, and is not just what's happening in Israel, but the way that the events taking place in the land have a ripple effect out into the nations, and affect the Jewish diaspora, the Jews outside the land as a whole. So, in terms of the wider regional implication, right now we know that at least one U.S. carrier strike group is in the Eastern Mediterranean off the coast of Lebanon and Israel. That's the USS Gerald R. Ford. There's another carrier strike group led by the carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower en route to the Eastern Mediterranean. One carrier strike group sends a message. Two carrier strike groups sends a very strong message indicating that there's probably going to be some fighting here. There's probably going to be some conflict. We're talking about over 10,000 U.S. naval personnel now involved in this. The kind of naval presence that you would see in a conventional war. So this is a pretty big deal. This is a pretty big commitment by the United States, and also there's a British naval presence there. Many of you know that a couple of days ago, Iran aligned Houthi rebels in Yemen on the other side of the Red Sea, launched what is believed to be 4 or 5 missiles and about 15 drones in the direction of Israel that were shot down by the USS Carney, a destroyer in the Red Sea, before they could get to Israel. So that, again, represents a wider escalation and broadening the scope of this conflict. Now it's not just the southern and northern borders of Israel with Gaza and with Lebanon and Syria. Now it's Houthi rebels in Yemen getting involved in this conflict. The Iranian regime obviously not happy about the U.S. naval presence in the Eastern Mediterranean and the U.S. commitment to Israel and the U.S. threats against Hezbollah if it enters the conflict, has begun directing its militias, its proxy militias in Iraq and Syria to attack U.S. bases there. There's still about 2,500 U.S. personnel in Iraq, both in Kurdistan, most of them around the air base in the Kurdish capital of Erbil. There's also a major air base near Baghdad and one in Anbar province, Iraq. All three of those sites have been repeatedly targeted by kamikaze drones launched by Iranian-aligned Shia militias over the past 3 days. The small contingent of about 900 U.S. personnel in northeast Syria supporting the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-led SDF, and other forces that were instrumental in dismantling the ISIS caliphate 3-4 years ago, now also under attack by Iranian-aligned militias. So Iran has essentially declared war on the United States in the Middle East via its proxy forces. The American military is essentially at war with Iran through its proxy forces throughout the region. So all of this represents what we've talked about for years, both in the Wire and in the larger FAI family, concerning a larger regional conflict in the Middle East, and how several factors have begun to coalesce together to really create a tinderbox whereby anything could ignite a regional conflict that could completely reshape the geopolitical dynamic of the Middle East. That spark, at least at this point, appears to have been the slaughter on October 7th. And how this continues to escalate, in which direction it goes, we don't really know yet. It's interesting to think about how the events of the last couple of weeks have many ways have mirrored the biblical prophetic picture of the Great Tribulation and Jacob's trouble, and the events of Daniel 11. For instance, the brutal slaughter of Jewish people in the land, the presence of Western military naval forces in the Mediterranean, the ships of Qatim, the larger regional implications, the global surge in anti-Semitism. I think what we can see happening today in many ways is a precursor, a harbinger, a foreshadowing of that time. It's foreshadowing what will happen on a much larger and more intense and deadlier scale at that time. But for now, I believe the Lord is giving us a very clear picture. If we have ears to hear and eyes to see it, that that not only are we getting close, I don't know how close, but we're starting to see some of the dynamics that will be in play at the very end of the age. FAI just published an article that I wrote last week called "A Strong Delusion," and in that article I talk a lot about how we see these protests happening in the streets around the world, and the sort of equivocation and denial of many politicians, not only in the Muslim world but also in the West, and how it can be argued that a lot of these people are just flat out delusional. That the belief that Israel is committing genocide in light of what the attempted genocide that was just committed against them, the belief that Israel is acting as Nazis when there are those in the streets chanting for the gassing of Jews and chanting that Hitler was right and should have finished the job, is the kind of strange, weird, inverted demonic logic that can only be described as delusional. And in 2 Thessalonians 2, the Apostle Paul talks about a time he describes as the rebellion, in which time God himself sends what he calls a strong delusion to capture the minds and hearts of those who Paul describes as hating the truth and who reject the gospel. And so God sort of confirms and reveals their condemnation through their acceptance of and support of this narrative that can only be described as delusional. Now, there are some aspects of that tie directly with the deception of that time and the kinds of false signs and other things that will take place under the reign of the Antichrist and his false prophet. So we can't see the exact nature of that delusion yet, but we know that delusion serves a role in the persecution of the covenant people, both the natural branches, Israel, and what Revelation 12 describes as the children or the offspring of that woman, Israel, which are those who hold to the testimony of Jesus, that is us, Gentile believers. So the delusion serves the purpose in the man of sin's persecution of and conquest of the saints for times, and half a time. So what we see today in many ways is that kind of that spirit of delusion that would allow people to think that this horrendous demonic evil that was perpetrated against the Jewish people living in the Gaza envelope is somehow justified. And that somehow they're the perpetrators of genocide, and not that somehow genocide is being perpetrated against them. And for those of us who see things a little more clearly, we look at that and we can't understand how you could possibly believe that or think that way. But I think it helps to understand that the principalities and powers are at work in this, that this is a form of divine, a providential condemnation. This is Romans 1 at work in the hearts of unbelievers, that God gives them over to this delusion because they hate the truth and reject the gospel. And so I think it really helps us to remember the spiritual dynamic at work here, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And those people out in the streets in chanting Free Palestine and From the River to the Sea, in many ways have become just pawns and puppets of the enemy. And I think now more than ever, we need to recalibrate in the Western churches and refocus on what are the essentials here. What is the baseline of this spiritual conflict, heavenly conflict that we're in, and what is our greatest weapon? And quite simply, it's the gospel of the kingdom. It's repent, for the kingdom of God is near. The very thing that John the Baptist and Jesus preached in the deserts of the Negev and in the towns of the Galilee is just as relevant for us today, now more than ever. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached to every tribe, nation, and language, and then the end will come. So this is our mandate. This is our greatest weapon, as we see just the heightening and intensifying levels of deception on the streets across the world. Now more than ever, those who hate the truth should be confronted by those who love the truth and who speak the truth in love. And so, heavy days, guys. Heavy days. We're going to take a break for a few days from the video updates. We're going to kind of go back to our regular schedule. Obviously, if anything sort of groundbreaking, a watershed event takes place, we'll come back to report on that. But in the meantime, we'll stay active on X. Please continue to follow us there. And an important way that you can help FAI to do gospel of the kingdom work in the land of Israel is to continue to support the bomb shelter campaign and the other initiatives that we're involved in Northern Galilee to care for civilians and IDF personnel there. Just saw today, day before yesterday, a community that's very near and dear to us, Kiryat Shimona, has been fully evacuated. Now I think over 30 communities in northern Israel evacuated. These are all people that have had to leave their homes. These are all, many people of which don't have access to adequate bomb shelters if things really kick off in the north with Hezbollah. So an important way that you can support FAI in our frontline work for the gospel of the kingdom is by giving to those initiatives. And as I said before, you can do that by going to fai.online/donate, and there's a button on that page to give to the Israeli initiatives. So again, thank you guys. We love you all. Blessings to you. See you soon. Maranatha.